Republican Congresswoman and MAGA cultist Elise Stefanik, who's rumored to be Donald Trump's potential running mate, was interviewed by CNN's Kaitlan Collins. And Stefanik's crazy was on full display, and Kaitlan Collins brutally fact-checked her every step of the way. And then Collins did something interesting. She asked a question that I have been dying for reporters to ask MAGA cultists, and it was glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video. The only thing I want to say for context is that Elise Stefanik, she is a member of the Republican House leadership. She essentially took Liz Cheney's place when Cheney was given the boot. And according to all accounts, prior to Donald Trump, Stefanik was a relatively moderate, relatively sane, and approachable member of Congress. But then she swung her sail towards full MAGA when Trump took over. And at this point, I don't know if it's, just a very persuasive performance or if she is genuinely crazy. But you all be the judge. Enjoy these clips. We'll unpack them together.
A big part of this is that President Biden went and sat down with them for 2 days, over the course of 2 days. Obviously, that's the interview that you're talking about, where they talked about his age. Donald Trump hasn't cooperated. Don't you just think if he had cooperated, he could be in the same situation?
This is at the behest of Joe Biden.
But if he had cooperated, don't you think he could be in the same situation?
First of all, there is a difference here.
Biden?
President Trump has, according to the Presidential Records Act, he has declassification authorities. Joe Biden does not have that when he was Vice President of the United States. Joe Biden also had classified documents when he was a sitting senator. That is not covered by the Presidential Records Act. So to say...
I've read the Presidential Records Act. It also doesn't give Trump the authority to just take documents and keep them in a ballroom.
This was a raid on Mar-a-Lago, Kaitlan, versus working with Joe Biden and saying he willfully broke the law but refusing to prosecute.
But
it is selective prosecution.
That's my point, because Trump did not hand over the documents for more than a year.
So as you can see here, I mean, even Kaitlan Collins is smiling there at the end because she recognizes that everything Stefanik says is crazy. So a couple of things. Number one, Joe Biden cooperated. Donald Trump did not. That distinction was meaningful, substantive, and Special Counsel Robert Hur, who was investigating President Biden for his mishandling of classified documents, noted that, okay? One cooperated, the other did not. Now, with respect to the Presidential Records Act, actually, before we get to that, let's go to the classification part. So she says, he had declassification authorities, Donald Trump did. But whether or not the documents were declassified or classified is irrelevant. It's actually a mistake that I see people on the right and the left make. Donald Trump was charged with the willful retention of national defense information, not classified documents. This is what his former Attorney General, Bill Barr, had to say about that distinction.
All right, I think you put your finger on something, Mr. Attorney General. There's a lot of talk about the classification of these documents, but the government's position, at least now, is that the former president was not lawfully in possession of these documents regardless of their classification. Is that a fair summary?
That's right. That's right. And I think Judge Deary suggested the same thing, and the 11th Circuit suggested the same thing. It doesn't become his personal property simply because it's declassified. If it's declassified, it's still the government's. And charges of mishandling sensitive information are based on it being so-called national defense information. It doesn't have to be classified.
Again, it's extremely important because whether or not Donald Trump classified or declassified the documents is ultimately irrelevant, even though we have audio saying that he did not declassify the documents in question. Then with respect to the Presidential Records Act, this idea that Donald Trump is given the authority to not only declassify items, but say what belongs to him personally and what doesn't. Again, Trump's own former Attorney General, Bill Barr, had this to say.
So now we can't forget here that this entire thing came about because of reckless conduct of the president. If he had just turned over the documents, which I think every other person in the country would have done, they're the government's documents. They're official records. They're not his personal records. Battle plans for an attack on another country or Defense Department documents about our capabilities are in no universe Donald J. Trump's personal documents.
Correct. Right. And we know this is the case because the documents, the few documents that he did turn over to the National Archives and the FBI, he wasn't charged for possessing. Right. So if he just cooperated, he would not be in legal trouble now. But those documents don't belong to him, classified or declassified, and he was obligated to turn them over. And had he done so, he never would have been prosecuted. So now let's go back to the interview with Kaitlan Collins now that we've debunked everything that Elise Stefanik had to say. I'm going to play two clips back to back because they're a continuation of one another, and then we'll unpack them.
Has the ability to pass legislation.
And we did.
But let's talk about the vice presidency, because you just said that you would be willing to serve in a Trump administration. Had you been vice president on January 6, 2021, what would you have done?
I stood up for the Constitution. I believe it was
what would you have done if you were vice president?
I would not have done what Mike Pence did. I don't think that was the right approach. I specifically stand by what I said on the House floor, and I stand by my statement, which was there was unconstitutional overreach. There was unconstitutional overreach in states like Pennsylvania, and I think it's very important that we continue to stand up for the Constitution and have legal and secure elections, which we did not have in 2020. And the tens of millions of Americans agree with me, Caitlin.
Well, I would say that.
All right, so let me play the second part of this clip, and then again, we will unpack that together.
I would say the Supreme Court in the state of Pennsylvania said that Republican passed changes to their law was constitutional. But it's notable to hear you say, given you're in the running to be the vice president, that you would have rejected those votes. Come this election, when Vice President Harris is in that position, would you be okay if she rejected the votes if Donald Trump wins?
Listen, we need to make sure the election is constitutional and legal. We're talking about Democrats.
Legal.
It was not, Caitlin. It was unconstitutional when there was circumventing state legislatures unilaterally changing election law. I stand by my statement on the House floor. And again, tens of millions of Americans agree with that statement and have questions about the validity
because
and legality
Republicans are so in doubt about the election.
No, because the American people have rightful questions on the constitutionality.
Because Republicans are
and
so in doubt about it.
Let me say this for you. When it comes to this election, we are seeing the Democrats trying to remove President Trump from the ballot. That is not constitutional. That is not a legal and safe, secure election. That's literally what's being discussed at the Supreme Court today, because radical leftists can't stand the fact that Donald Trump continues to skyrocket in the polls.
Right. So again, a couple of things here that need to be addressed. First things first. So she appeals to the tens of millions of Americans. Okay. It's true. Tens of millions of Americans are doubting and have doubted the legitimacy of the 2020 election. Although, as Caitlin points out, that's because Republicans keep telling them to doubt. It's like if I start asking questions and then appeal to the fact that questions are being asked as a basis for my concern, it's circular logic. But the fact of the matter is, more people than not, 2/3 of Americans believe that the 2020 election was legitimate. So if we're appealing to the number of people who believe a thing for its legitimacy, then Biden still wins because more people think Biden was legitimately elected than not. So Stefanik's argument loses because she's stupid and a loser. We should make fun of her. But beyond that, too, if we're also appealing to popularity, 56% of Americans believe that Donald Trump should be disqualified from some or all ballots. So again, if we're appealing to the popularity of an idea for its legitimacy, then Trump loses again because more people than not think that he should be kicked off some or all ballots. But more important, the fact of the matter is that Kaitlan Collins did something really good here, and I wish she would have. Her mistake was not holding Stefanik's feet to the fire, which is this. If you believe that the vice president, you say that you would not have done if you were vice president, certify the results of the 2020 election, and you've produced no evidence, you just have questions. Well, right now, the vice president is a Democrat, Kamala Harris. So let's say Donald Trump wins the 2024 election. I guess by your logic, if we have questions about the legitimacy of that win, then Vice President Harris can just not certify the results of the election, right? We could do that. And obviously she doesn't believe that. Obviously she doesn't think that Vice President Harris has the power to do it. I don't think Vice President Harris has the power to do it. But you see the cherry picking there? They want it when it's convenient for them. Then the vice president is imbued with extraordinary powers to essentially single-handedly and unilaterally alter the results of an election. But if it's a Democrat, no, that doesn't count. This is a power reserved for Republican vice presidents, not Democrat vice presidents. John Eastman, the lawyer who came up with the theory in the first place, said as much. You know, when one of Mike Pence's attorneys said, okay, well, by your logic, Eastman, I guess in 2000, Al Gore could have done this. Eastman said, well, no, of course not. Or in 2024, Kamala Harris could do this, right? No, of course not. Only this election. Or Joe Biden in 2016 when Trump won the first time, right? Of course not. See what I'm saying? It's because they're hypocrites. And again, it's another reason why we should endlessly mock them and never take them seriously. Last clip I want to play here is Elise Stefanik being confronted about how she has since changed her perspective on the January 6th insurrection.
Going to win.
You deleted a statement that was on your website recently calling January 6th a tragic day. Why was it deleted, though?
I have all my public statements from the current Congress. You can access all of my previous public statements.
But why was it deleted from your website?
I only have the press releases from this current Congress. All of those statements are available since I was elected on multiple social media accounts, and you can access it there. Just
so it
like
wasn't
everyone
a retraction of what you said?
I have no, certainly not. I have press releases for this current Congress, and the reality is you as a journalist can go through all of my official social media accounts and find all of my previous statements.
The last thing I have to ask you,
going to win.
So she's removing records from her website where she refers to January 6th as anything other than what it was, because now she has to sanitize it. And as somebody points out on Twitter, this is a picture of Elise Stefanik hunkering down as Trump insurrectionists tried to breach the Capitol to kill her and her colleagues and the vice president. But she's changed her tune on it now because it's politically convenient and she's unprincipled. I thought Kaitlan Collins did a great job. I'm glad that someone finally asked the questions, and this question should be standard anytime you speak to an election denier. Okay, if you think that this election was unconstitutional or incorrect, even though, there was no Supreme Court ruling which held that Pennsylvania's election laws were unconstitutional, that's just her feelings on the matter, and we should have no respect for her feelings. It should make fun of them relentlessly. If that's your perspective, does that mean that a Democratic vice president for this election or any election in the future where the Democrat is in the White House and has the vice presidency, does that mean they can also toss out election results because they have questions? And you should relentlessly ask that question and get them on the record, make them look in the camera and answer the question, because then it will show to the American people they absolutely don't believe what they say. So, great performance. Let me know what you think in the comments.